ballroom fell silent as Elizabeth Harrington stepped onto the stage, commanding attention in her tailored navy dress. The spotlight caught the subtle shimmer of her diamond earrings, the first significant purchase she'd made when her company went public. 300 industry executives watched as she approached the podium, her smile confident, her shoulders back. In the last row, Richard Harrington froze, program clutched in his trembling hands. The ex-wife he'd discarded 7 years ago now stood before him as the keynote speaker at the National Food Industry Conference, her company valued at over $1 billion. Have you ever watched someone's face when they realize the woman they discarded is now worth more than they ever dreamed? When the power dynamic they thought was permanent has completely reversed. 7 years ago, Richard walked out on Beth and their newborn twins for a younger model. Today, he's desperate for investors while she's the billion-dollar keynote speaker everyone came to hear. But how does a heartbroken mother of twins transform betrayal into an empire? And what happens when the man who abandoned her family suddenly wants back in? If you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch, hit that like button right now. Let me know in the comments if you've turned pain into purpose. Thank you for that warm welcome, Beth began, her voice carrying the gentle lilt of her Oklahoma roots. 7 years ago, I was baking pies in my parents' kitchen with 2 babies napping nearby, wondering how I was going to make rent the following month. A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the audience. Today, Harrington Foods products are in over 30,000 stores nationwide, and that same pecan pie recipe my grandmother taught me has become America's best-selling dessert. She paused, letting the magnitude of that transformation sink in. But this isn't a story about pie. It's a story about resilience, about finding sweetness in the midst of bitterness, and about the power of believing in yourself when no one else does. Richard sank lower in his seat, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. The woman on stage bore little resemblance to the young wife he'd discarded, not just in her elegant appearance, but in the core of steel that radiated from her every word, every gesture. This was a woman who had not just survived abandonment but had transformed it into triumph. I lost everything once, Beth continued, her voice even and strong. But I learned what really matters. My children, my determination, and the ability to start over. Success isn't about getting even. It's about building something that lasts. As she spoke, Richard's mind drifted back to their last night together. The marble kitchen counter in their Dallas townhouse. The twins, just 3 weeks old, sleeping upstairs. Beth's face, still soft from pregnancy, crumpling as he told her he was leaving. At Harrington Foods, we believe in second chances, Beth was saying now. That's why 60% of our workforce consists of women returning to the job market. Many of them single mothers like I was. That's why our foundation provides business grants to women entrepreneurs in underserved communities. And that's why our newest initiative will fund culinary scholarships for young people who, like me, come from backgrounds where fancy business degrees weren't an option. The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Beth's smile widened as she looked toward the front row, where 2 children sat. A boy and girl, both 7, both watching their mother with unmistakable pride. Thank you, she said as the applause finally quieted. I'll close with this thought. When life hands you bitter lemons, you have 2 choices. You can remain bitter, or you can add sugar, water, and make something refreshing. I chose to make something sweet, not just for myself, but for my children and for the thousands of families who now gather around tables sharing our food and making memories together. As Beth left the stage to a standing ovation, Richard remained rooted in place, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Pride in what Beth had accomplished, shame for his role in her pain, and a devastating sense of loss for all he had thrown away. The reception following the keynote was crowded with industry leaders eager to speak with Beth. She moved through the room graciously, one hand often resting protectively on Emma or Ethan's shoulder as they stayed close, occasionally shy in the face of so much attention. Ms. Harrington, your speech was inspiring, said a woman from a major grocery chain. We'd love to discuss expanding your holiday line for next season. I'd be delighted, Beth replied, exchanging business cards. My team will reach out next week to set up a meeting. As the woman moved away, Beth felt a shift in the energy around her. A sudden tension. She turned to find Richard standing a few feet away, looking older and diminished in a suit that had seen better days. Their eyes met across the space between them, years of unspoken history hanging in the air. "Beth," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She instinctively drew the twins closer to her sides, a protective gesture she couldn't suppress. "Richard, I didn't know you were attending the conference. I'm here for the real estate development track," he explained, his eyes moving to the children. "These are our children," Beth confirmed quietly. "Emma, Ethan, this is Mr. Harrington." The twins regarded him with curiosity but no recognition. They had seen photos, knew the basic outline of who their father was, but he had been an abstract concept rather than a presence in their lives. "Hello," Emma said politely, while Ethan offered a small nod. Richard swallowed hard, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. "They're beautiful, Beth. They look just like us," she finished for him. "Yes, they do." An awkward silence fell between them, broken when Jessie, Beth's sister-in-law and the twins' beloved aunt, approached. "Beth, the Food Network people are looking for you," she said, casting a wary glance at Richard. "Something about an interview?" "Thank you, Jessie," Beth replied. "Would you mind taking the twins for some refreshments? I'll just be a moment." Once the children were out of earshot, Beth turned back to Richard, her expression composed but guarded. "I didn't expect to see you here, Beth. I had no idea," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the conference hall where she'd spoken. You've done incredible things." She met his gaze calmly. "I did it for our children, Richard. They deserved a mother who never gave up. And yes, I built something big. But I never needed your approval to do it." He flinched slightly at her words, then his gaze shifted to where Emma and Ethan stood by the refreshment table, Jessie helping them select cookies. "They're so grown, and they look just like us. I can't believe how much I missed." Beth nodded gently. "They've grown up happy, loved, and strong, without wondering why their father chose glamour over family." Richard's voice cracked as he spoke. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. Is there any way? Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," Beth suggested, gesturing toward a side door that led to a smaller reception room. Once inside, with the door closed behind them, Richard seemed to deflate, sinking into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "How did this happen, Beth?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you build all this?" Beth remained standing, maintaining the physical and emotional high ground. "One day at a time, one pie at a time, one decision at a time. But we tried for years to have children," Richard said, shaking his head in disbelief. "And then when the twins finally came, I just left." "What kind of man does that?" "The kind who values youth and beauty over substance and commitment," Beth replied, her voice even. "The kind who sees a family as an accessory rather than a blessing." Richard winced at the accuracy of her assessment. "I was a fool." "Yes," Beth agreed simply. "You were." The directness of her response seemed to surprise him. The Beth he had known 7 years ago would have softened the blow, would have rushed to make him feel better even when he was wrong. This Beth had no interest in cushioning his ego. "Tell me what happened," he said finally. "After I left. How did you go from there to this?" Beth considered him for a long moment, weighing whether he deserved to know her story. Finally, she spoke, her voice taking on the cadence of a woman who had told this tale before, but never to the man who had set it in motion. "After you left, I couldn't stay in Dallas," she began. "Every corner of that house reminded me of your betrayal. Every friend who suddenly stopped calling reminded me how quickly people choose sides when money and power are involved." She moved to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline as she continued. "I took the twins and went home to Tulsa, to my parents' house. I had nothing but a suitcase, 2 newborns, and the $5,000 you left in our joint account before you cleaned it out." Richard had the decency to look ashamed. I thought it would be enough until you. Until I what? Beth interrupted. Found another man to support me? Got a job with no recent work experience and 2 infants to care for? What exactly was your plan for me, Richard? He had no answer. My mother took one look at me standing on her porch with those babies and said, "Child, he did you a favor." I thought she'd lost her mind. Beth smiled at the memory. But she was right. You leaving forced me to find strength I never knew I had. As Richard sat in stunned silence, Beth's mind drifted back to the beginning of their story, to the days when she had believed in him. In them, in the future they would build together. They had met at a charity gala in Dallas 12 years before their divorce. Beth, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration, had been working for a catering company to pay off her student loans. Richard, already showing promise in real estate development at 30, had been immediately drawn to her warmth and authenticity. "You're different from the other women here," he told her that night, helping her clear dessert plates despite the raised eyebrows from his colleagues. "You're real." Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Richard, ambitious and charismatic, had swept Beth off her feet with his grand visions and unwavering confidence. Within 6 months, they were married, settling into a modest apartment in Dallas as Richard worked to establish his own development company. Those early years had been lean but happy. Beth had handled the books for Richard's fledgling business, working late into the night at their kitchen table while he networked and closed deals. She'd believed in his vision, supported his dreams, put her own career aspirations on hold to help build his. "Remember how we used to celebrate every small victory?" Beth asked, her voice softening with the memory. "That first successful renovation project in Oak Cliff. The day you signed the lease on your first office space. We'd splurge on a bottle of champagne we couldn't afford and toast to our future." Richard nodded, his eyes distant. "You always believed in me, even when the banks didn't." "I did," Beth agreed. "And when your company finally took off, I was so proud." We both were. The success had come gradually, then all at once. By their 5th year of marriage, Harrington Development Group was handling multimillion-dollar projects across Texas. They'd moved into a beautiful home in Highland Park, joined the right country clubs, attended the right parties. Richard had become the man he'd always wanted to be, respected, wealthy, powerful. And Beth had become, what? The supportive wife, the perfect hostess, the woman who stood beside him at events, smiling and gracious, while her own dreams gathered dust. "We started trying for a baby early in our marriage," Beth continued, her voice growing quieter. "Remember how excited we were? How sure we were that it would happen right away. But it hadn't happened right away. Month after month of disappointment had turned into years of specialists, treatments, tears. The strain had begun to show in their marriage. Richard, accustomed to controlling outcomes through sheer will and money, had grown frustrated with this challenge he couldn't overcome. "I started to feel like I was failing you," Beth admitted. "Like my body was betraying us both." "I never should have made you feel that way," Richard said, his voice thick with regret. "It wasn't your fault." "No," Beth agreed. "It wasn't. But you made it feel like it was." The treatments had finally worked after years of trying. When the doctor had confirmed not just a pregnancy but twins, Beth had wept with joy. Richard had seemed happy too, proud even, already talking about the Harrington heirs who would someday take over his company. Throughout the pregnancy, Beth had glowed with happiness, nesting and preparing for the babies she had wanted for so long. If she noticed Richard's increasing absences, his late nights at the office, his distraction when he was home, she had attributed it to work stress, to his excitement about becoming a father. "I was so naive," Beth said, shaking her head at her younger self. "So trusting. Even when Marissa Jenkins called to tell me she'd seen you having dinner with a young woman at the mansion, I made excuses for you. Business meeting, I told myself. Client dinner." Richard's face flushed with shame. "Sophia was a model I met at a charity auction. She was 25, ambitious, beautiful. She made me feel young, powerful. I told myself it was just a flirtation, nothing serious." Until it was, Beth finished for him. The twins had been born 3 weeks early, a difficult C-section that had left Beth exhausted and in pain. Richard had been there for the birth, had held Emma and Ethan with wonder in his eyes. For a brief moment, Beth had thought perhaps the babies would bring them closer, would remind Richard of what truly mattered. Instead, 3 weeks later, he had sat her down in their marble kitchen and ended their marriage with clinical detachment. "I want a divorce," he had said, watching her face crumple as she sat at the kitchen island, still recovering from her C-section. "Sophia understands me in ways you never did." "Richard, please," Beth had whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We just had babies. Our babies. We can work through this." "There's nothing to work through," he'd replied coldly. "I've made my decision. You can keep the house and enough to get by. You'll be fine with the kids." He'd walked out that night, leaving behind the woman who had supported him through every lean year, who had believed in him when no one else did. The woman who had just given him the children they'd spent years praying for. All for Sophia Lang, with her perfect body and ambitious eyes, who had made him feel young and powerful again. "The divorce was ugly," Beth said, returning to the present. "Your lawyers tried to minimize everything. My contributions to your business, my needs as a new mother, the children's future requirements. You fought me on every point, even though you were the one who left." Richard couldn't meet her eyes. "I was angry, defensive. I told myself you were trying to punish me, to take what I'd built." "What we built," Beth corrected him. "But in the end, I didn't want your money. I just wanted peace. I wanted to raise our children without bitterness and fighting. So I took what you offered, the house I couldn't afford to maintain, the generous settlement that barely covered 6 months of expenses, and full custody of the twins." She paused, her gaze direct and unflinching. "And then I left Dallas with my dignity intact and my children in my arms. That was worth more than anything you could have given me." Sisters, have you witnessed someone underestimate a strong black woman? Tag someone who needs this reminder of our resilience and drop a crown in the comments. The first months in Tulsa had been a blur of sleepless nights and tearful days. Beth's parents' modest home had become her refuge, a place where she could heal and gather her strength. Her mother would rock one twin while Beth nursed the other, her weathered hands gentle, her wisdom constant. "You come from strong stock, Elizabeth Marie," her mother would say. "Your grandmother raised 6 children after your grandfather passed. Your great-grandmother built a life from nothing during the hardest of times. And here you are, with a college education and 2 beautiful babies. You think some man leaving you is going to break that line of strength? Think again." During those early days, cooking became Beth's therapy. While the twins napped, she would stand beside her grandmother in the kitchen, learning the recipes that had sustained their family through generations of hardship and joy. "The secret's in the patience," Grandma would say, showing Beth how to caramelize the pecans for her famous pie. "Can't rush goodness, just like you can't rush healing." By the time the twins were 6 months old, Beth had begun selling baked goods at the local farmer's market. Her pecan pies, made from her grandmother's recipe with a twist of honey instead of corn syrup, quickly developed a following. Soon she was taking orders for church events, family reunions, and small weddings. "I remember the first time I made $100 in a single day at that market," Beth told Richard, the memory bringing warmth to her voice. "I came home and cried because it meant I could buy diapers without asking my parents for help." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I tried to send child support after the divorce was final, but the checks came back. Your father said you didn't want anything from me." "I didn't," Beth confirmed. "Not after your lawyer tried to claim I'd abandoned our marriage by moving to Tulsa. Not after you testified that I'd been emotionally unavailable during my pregnancy, as if growing your children was some kind of personal failing." The divorce had been swift and brutal. Richard's family money had secured him the best attorneys, while Beth could barely afford the filing fees. In the end, she had walked away with nothing but her maiden name restored and full custody of the twins, the only thing she had truly wanted. By the time the twins were toddlers, I had 3 regular employees, all single mothers who needed flexible hours just like I did. We converted my parents' garage into a commercial kitchen and called ourselves Beth's Southern Sweets. We sold pies, cakes, and cookies to every restaurant and cafe in a 50-mile radius. Beth's business acumen had surprised even herself. She took online courses in marketing and business management while the twins slept. She learned about food safety regulations, packaging requirements, and distribution channels. She built a website and started shipping her most popular items to customers who had moved away but still craved a taste of home. The turning point came when Emma was 4, Beth continued. She had a high fever that wouldn't break. I had to take her to the emergency room, but I had no health insurance. The bill wiped out our savings, and I realized that if I wanted security for my children, I needed to think bigger. That night, after the crisis had passed and both twins were sleeping soundly, Beth had sat at her grandmother's kitchen table with a notebook and a determination that bordered on desperation. If local success wasn't enough, she would have to expand. If fresh baked goods were too limited, she would have to innovate. I developed a method to make our pecan pies shelf-stable without losing the homemade taste, Beth explained. It took months of experimentation, but eventually I created a product that could be shipped nationwide and still taste like it came from Grandma's oven. With her new product ready, Beth had approached local banks for a loan to scale production. The rejections had been unanimous and often condescending. One loan officer actually suggested I find a husband to co-sign, Beth said with a bitter laugh. As if my business plan, growing sales, and perfect credit weren't enough because I was a single black mother. Richard winced. That sounds like something I would have said back then. Yes, Beth agreed. It does. The breakthrough had come through an unexpected channel. One of Beth's regular customers, a producer for a regional home shopping network, had invited her to showcase her pies on a special holiday episode. I was terrified, Beth admitted. I'd never been on television before, but I knew this was my chance, so I put on my best dress, practiced my pitch until I could recite it in my sleep, and drove to the studio with a car full of pies. The segment had been scheduled for 10 minutes. Beth had sold out of her entire inventory 500 pies in 7. The switchboard had lit up with calls from viewers across the South, eager to taste the pecan pie that the host had described as heaven on a plate. The network called the next day and offered me a regular spot, Beth said, a smile playing at her lips. Suddenly, I had orders coming in faster than I could fill them. I needed a real production facility, more staff, better equipment. This time, when Beth approached the banks, she brought with her purchase orders and a contract with the shopping network. The loans were approved, and Beth's Southern Sweets moved into its first real factory. A small facility on the outskirts of Tulsa with 20 employees, most of them women returning to the workforce after raising children or leaving difficult situations. We started with regional grocery chains in the South, Beth explained. Places where people understood the cultural significance of soul food and appreciated authentic flavors. Within 2 years, we were in every major supermarket across the Southeast. National expansion had followed, along with an expanded product line that included gourmet cookie mixes, healthier versions of classic desserts, and Beth's signature shelf-stable pies in various flavors. Each product featured her grandmother's recipes as a foundation, adapted for modern tastes and needs. People weren't just buying food, Beth said. They were buying connection to tradition, to family, to something authentic in a world of processed convenience. As she spoke, Richard's expression shifted from shock to something like awe. You did all this while raising our children alone? I did, Beth confirmed. And I didn't do it to prove anything to you, Richard. I did it because I refused to let your choices determine our future. 5 years after launching her first product line, Beth had rebranded the company as Harrington Foods Incorporated, a decision that had surprised many who knew her story. Why keep his name? Her mother had asked when Beth shared the new logo designs. Because I earned it, Beth had replied simply. 12 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, and now a company that will be their legacy. The Harrington name is as much mine as it is his, maybe more so now. The rebranding had coincided with Beth's biggest business gamble, a line of healthier comfort foods that maintain the flavor of traditional recipes while reducing sugar, salt, and preservatives. Food critics had been skeptical, but consumers had embraced the products enthusiastically, particularly mothers looking for convenient options they could feel good about serving their families. Last year, we hit the billion-dollar valuation mark, Beth said, her voice matter-of-fact rather than boastful. We now have factories in Texas, Georgia, and Oklahoma, employing over 800 people, 60% of them women returning to the workforce. Our foundation provides grants to women entrepreneurs and funds culinary scholarships for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Richard sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the young wife he had so carelessly discarded. And the twins? How have they been through all this? Beth's expression softened at the mention of their children. They're amazing kids, Richard. Emma is artistic, sensitive, already showing talent in the kitchen. Ethan is analytical, practical, always asking questions about how things work. They're both doing well in school, have friends, activities. Do they? Richard hesitated, then forced himself to continue. Do they ask about me? They did when they were younger, Beth admitted. I never lied to them. I told them you were their father, that you lived in Dallas, that you weren't able to be part of our family anymore. As they got older, they asked more specific questions, and I answered those honestly too. What did you tell them? Richard asked, his voice barely audible. The truth, Beth said simply. That you left us for another woman when they were babies. That you chose a different life. That it wasn't their fault. Richard flinched at the bluntness of her words. They must hate me. They don't know you well enough to hate you, Beth replied. You're an abstract concept to them, Richard. A photograph, a story. They've never felt the impact of your absence because they've never known your presence. The truth of that statement hit Richard like a physical blow. He had missed everything. First steps, first words, first days of school. He had missed fevers and nightmares, scraped knees and lost teeth. He had missed the everyday moments that formed the foundation of a parent-child relationship. I've been a fool, he said again. But this time the words carried the weight of 7 years of absence, of choices that couldn't be undone. Yes, Beth agreed, but her voice had lost its edge. But that doesn't mean you can't make better choices now. Richard looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that Emma and Ethan deserve to know their father, if he's genuinely interested in being part of their lives, Beth said carefully. Not the man who left, but the man you might become. Someone who puts their needs first, who shows up consistently, who earns their trust. I want that chance, Richard said immediately. More than anything. Beth studied him, searching for sincerity in his expression. It won't be easy. They're 7, not babies anymore. They have opinions, feelings, questions you'll need to answer. And I won't allow you to disappoint them again. I understand. Richard nodded, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I'll do whatever it takes, whatever you think is best. We'll start slowly, Beth decided. Supervised visits, perhaps once a month. If that goes well, we can discuss more regular contact. Relief washed over Richard's face. Thank you, Beth. I don't deserve your kindness. This isn't about what you deserve, Beth replied honestly. It's about what's best for Emma and Ethan. They should know where they come from. All of it, the good and the bad. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Jessie poked her head in, her expression concerned. Beth, the twins are getting tired, and you have that early flight tomorrow. Thank you, Jessie, Beth said, rising from her chair. I'll be right there. As Jessie withdrew, Beth turned back to Richard. I'm staying at the Peninsula. Why don't you come by tomorrow morning around 9? You can have breakfast with us before we leave for the airport. It would give you a chance to talk with the twins in a casual setting. I'd like that very much, Richard said, standing as well. Beth, don't, she interrupted gently. Don't make promises or declarations. Just show up tomorrow. Be kind to our children, and we'll go from there. Richard nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. 9 o'clock. I'll be there. As Beth moved toward the door, Richard spoke again, his voice soft but clear. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you've built, who you've become, it's extraordinary. Beth paused, her hand on the doorknob. Thank you, she said simply. But I didn't do it for your pride or approval. I did it for myself, for our children, and for every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough. With that, she left the room, her head high, her steps confident. A woman who had transformed betrayal into triumph, heartbreak into empire, abandonment into strength. If you believe in the power of sisterhood and community to lift us up, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales for more stories that celebrate our strength. The next morning dawned clear and bright, Chicago's skyline gleaming in the early sunlight. In their peninsula suite, Beth helped the twins prepare for breakfast, answering their curious questions about the man they would be meeting. Is he really our dad? Emma asked, her small fingers working to fasten the buttons on her cardigan. Yes, sweetheart, Beth replied, gently taking over the task. He's your biological father, but he doesn't live with us, Ethan stated, more observation than question. He lives in Dallas. That's right, Beth confirmed. Your father and I divorced when you were babies. He's been living his own life and we've been living ours. Is he nice? Emma wanted to know, her amber eyes, so like Richard's, wide with uncertainty. Beth chose her words carefully. He seems to want to get to know you both, and that's a good thing. You can decide for yourselves what you think of him. A knock at the door ended their conversation. Beth smoothed her cream silk blouse, took a deep breath, and went to answer it. Richard stood in the hallway, looking more put together than he had the previous day. He'd clearly made an effort, his suit pressed, his hair neatly combed, a small gift bag in each hand. Good morning, he said, his voice betraying his nervousness. I hope I'm not too early. Right on time, Beth assured him, stepping back to allow him entry. The twins are ready for breakfast. We can eat here in the suite. I ordered room service. Richard nodded gratefully, understanding that Beth had chosen a private setting for this first real meeting. As he entered the living area of the suite, he saw Emma and Ethan sitting side by side on the sofa, their postures mirror images of cautious curiosity. Hello, he said, stopping a respectful distance away. I'm Richard. It's very nice to meet you both. Emma, always the more outgoing of the two, spoke first. I'm Emma. I'm 7.5. This is my brother Ethan. He's 7.5 too, but I was born 6 minutes earlier. A smile tugged at Richard's lips. That makes you the big sister then. That's what I always tell him, Emma agreed seriously. Ethan studied Richard with a thoughtful expression that reminded Beth painfully of his father. You look like the pictures, he finally said. What pictures? Richard asked, glancing at Beth. Mom has a photo album, Ethan explained. There are some pictures of you and her from before we were born. At your wedding and stuff. Beth had indeed kept a small album of photographs from their marriage, not out of sentimentality, but because she believed the twins deserved to see evidence of their origins, to know that they had come from what was once love, even if it hadn't lasted. I see, Richard said, clearly touched that Beth had preserved this connection for their children. Well, I brought you both something, just a small gift. He held out the bags, one to each child. Beth tensed slightly, wondering what Richard might have chosen, hoping it wouldn't be something extravagant or inappropriate. She needn't have worried. As the twins opened their gifts, they each pulled out a snow globe containing a miniature Chicago skyline. I thought you might like a souvenir of your trip, Richard explained. Something to remember Chicago by. Cool, Emma exclaimed, shaking the globe to watch the snow swirl around the tiny buildings. Look, Mom, it has the big bean thing we saw yesterday. Cloud Gate. Ethan corrected his sister, examining his own globe with equal appreciation. That's what the real name of the bean sculpture is. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. You're welcome, Richard replied, visibly relieved at their positive reaction. And you can call me Well, whatever you're comfortable with. A knock announced the arrival of breakfast. As Beth directed the hotel staff in setting up the meal on the suite's dining table, Richard took the opportunity to engage with the twins, asking them about their visit to Chicago, their favorite subjects in school, their hobbies. His questions were genuine, his attention focused entirely on their responses. By the time they sat down to eat, some of the initial awkwardness had dissipated. The twins, with the remarkable adaptability of children, had begun to relax in Richard's presence, though they still looked to Beth for reassurance when uncertain. "Mom says you build buildings," Ethan said as he carefully spread jam on his toast. "Like, big ones?" Richard nodded. "That's right. My company develops real estate, office buildings, shopping centers, apartment complexes. Do you build them yourself?" Emma asked, clearly picturing Richard in a hard hat with a hammer. Richard chuckled. "No, I hire architects to design them and construction companies to build them. My job is more about finding the right locations, securing financing, and overseeing the projects." "Mom builds things too," Ethan said proudly. "She built a whole company." "Yes, she did," Richard agreed, his admiration evident. "A very successful one. We help sometimes," Emma added. "Mom lets us taste test new recipes. I liked the chocolate pecan pie best, but Ethan likes the original better." "I'm a traditionalist," Ethan explained with such adult seriousness that Beth had to hide a smile. "I'd love to try both someday," Richard said. "If that would be okay." The conversation continued, flowing more easily as the meal progressed. Richard proved to be good with the twins, listening attentively to their stories, answering their questions honestly but age-appropriately, never talking down to them or dismissing their interests. Beth observed this interaction with mixed emotions. Part of her, the protective mother, remained wary, alert for any sign that Richard might hurt or disappoint her children. But another part, the part that had once loved this man, that had dreamed of raising a family with him, felt a bittersweet pang at the glimpse of what might have been. As breakfast concluded, Beth glanced at her watch. "We should start packing up. Our flight leaves in a few hours." The twins excused themselves to gather their belongings, leaving Beth and Richard alone at the table. "They're incredible, Beth," Richard said softly. "So bright, so well-adjusted. You've done an amazing job with them." "Thank you," Beth replied. "They make it easy most days. They're good kids." "When can I see them again?" Richard asked, the question tentative but hopeful. Beth considered this. "We live in Tulsa. You're in Dallas. It's not an insurmountable distance, but it's not exactly convenient either." "I could come to Tulsa," Richard offered immediately. "Once a month, like you suggested. More often if you and the twins are comfortable with that." Beth nodded slowly. "Let's start with once a month. Perhaps a Saturday afternoon. You could take them to the park for ice cream, something simple. I'd be nearby, but not hovering." "That sounds perfect," Richard agreed. "And Beth, thank you for giving me this chance. I know you have every reason not to." "The twins deserve to know you," Beth said simply. "As long as you're committed to being a positive presence in their lives, I won't stand in the way." Richard's expression grew serious. "I am committed. I've missed 7 years of their lives. I don't want to miss any more." Beth studied him, searching for sincerity in his eyes. What she saw satisfied her, at least for now. "Then we'll make it work, for their sake." As they exchanged contact information and discussed logistics for Richard's first visit to Tulsa, Beth felt a strange sense of closure. The man sitting across from her was still Richard, still handsome despite the new lines in his face, still charismatic despite his diminished circumstances, but he was no longer the center of her world, no longer the man who could break her heart with a single cruel word. She had built a life without him, a successful business, a loving home for their children. She had transformed herself from the devastated young mother he had abandoned into a confident, powerful woman who answered to no one but herself. Whatever happened next with Richard's relationship with the twins, Beth knew she would be fine. More than fine, she would continue to thrive. When it was time to leave, Richard helped carry their luggage down to the waiting car. The twins, having warmed to him over breakfast, allowed him to hug them goodbye, though the embraces were brief and somewhat awkward. "I'll see you both soon," Richard promised. "In Tulsa. We can get to know each other better there." "Okay," Emma said, offering him a small smile. "Maybe you can try Mom's pecan pie then." "I'd like that very much," Richard replied, his voice thick with emotion. As the car pulled away from the curb, Beth watched Richard through the rear window, a solitary figure growing smaller with distance. The twins were already absorbed in their snow globes, shaking them to create miniature blizzards around the Chicago skyline. "Mom," Ethan asked, looking up from his souvenir, "is Mr. Harrington going to be part of our family now?" Beth chose her words carefully. "He's already part of our family in one way. He's your biological father. Whether he becomes more than that depends on many things. But what I want you both to remember is that our family, you, me, Grandma and Grandpa, Aunt Jessie, that's solid. That doesn't change, no matter what." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "I think he's sad," she observed with the startling perception children sometimes display. "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" Beth asked. "His eyes," Emma said simply. "They look happy when he smiles, but sad the rest of the time. Like he lost something important." Out of the mouths of babes, Beth thought. Well, in a way, he did lose something important. He lost the chance to watch you both grow up. That's a very sad thing for a parent to miss. But it was his choice, right? Ethan asked, his logical mind seeking clarity. He chose to leave. Yes, Beth confirmed. Never one to shield her children from difficult truths. He did make that choice. But people can regret their choices, can wish they had done things differently. And can they fix it? Emma wanted to know. Can they make it better after they make a bad choice? Beth looked at her daughter's earnest face, at her son's thoughtful expression, and felt a surge of love for these remarkable children who were trying to make sense of a complicated adult world. Sometimes, she said honestly, not always and not completely. Some choices have consequences that can't be undone. But people can learn, can grow, can try to do better. And we can choose whether to give them that chance. The twins considered this, processing it in their different ways. Emma with her heart, Ethan with his head. I think we should give him a chance, Emma decided finally. Everyone deserves a second chance, right? That's what you always say about the ladies who work at the factory. Beth smiled at her daughter's application of this principle. That's true. I do believe in second chances. But with conditions, Ethan added, ever the pragmatist. Like, they have to prove they deserve it. Also true, Beth agreed. Very wise, both of you. As the car carried them toward the airport, Beth felt a sense of peace settle over her. The confrontation she had both dreaded and perhaps secretly anticipated for 7 years had come and gone. Richard had seen the woman she had become, the empire she had built, the children she had raised. And she had seen him too. Not the powerful, confident man who had once dominated her world, but a humbled, regretful human being seeking redemption. Whether he would find it, whether he would prove worthy of the second chance their children seemed willing to offer, remained to be seen. But Beth was no longer invested in his success or failure. Her happiness, her fulfillment, her sense of self-worth no longer depended on Richard Harrington's choices. She had built something sweet from the bitter lemons he had handed her. And that, perhaps, was the greatest triumph of all. 2 years later, the kitchen of Beth's Tulsa farmhouse bustled with activity as Emma and Ethan, now 9, helped prepare Sunday dinner. The spacious, warm space was the heart of their home. Professional-grade appliances alongside cherished family heirlooms, the perfect blend of Beth's past and present. Mama, is Daddy coming today? Emma asked, carefully measuring flour for the biscuits. Yes, sweetheart, Beth replied, checking the roast chicken in the oven. He'll be here at 4. Over the past 2 years, Richard had slowly earned a place in the twins' lives. It began with supervised visits at a park near Beth's home. Awkward at first, but gradually warming as he genuinely tried to know his children. He never missed a scheduled visit, brought thoughtful gifts rather than showy ones, and most importantly, listened to them with real interest. The transition from Mr. Harrington to Daddy had happened naturally, about 6 months into their new relationship. Emma had used the term first, Ethan following a few weeks later, each child moving at their own pace toward acceptance. For his part, Richard had proven more committed than Beth had dared to hope. When his development company finally folded under the weight of bad investments and market shifts, he had made a decision that surprised everyone. He moved from Dallas to Tulsa, taking a position teaching real estate courses at Tulsa Community College. The salary was modest compared to his former wealth, but it provided stability and, surprisingly, satisfaction. He's good at teaching, Ethan had reported after sitting in on one of Richard's classes during a school career day. People listen to him. He explains things so they make sense. The doorbell rang precisely at 4 o'clock. Richard was nothing if not punctual these days. "I'll get it," Ethan called, racing to the front door with Emma close behind. Beth wiped her hands on a dish towel, listening to the children's excited greetings. Richard's deeper voice responded warmly, asking about their week at school, complimenting something they'd made. When they entered the kitchen, Richard was carrying a small potted plant, a peace lily, rather than his usual bouquet for the table. "I thought this might last longer," he explained, setting it on the counter. The florist said they're easy to care for. "It's lovely," Beth said, genuinely appreciative of the thoughtfulness. "Thank you." Richard looked better these days, still older than his 51 years, but healthier. The bitterness that had etched lines into his face had softened, replaced by the gentler marks of laughter and genuine emotion. "Something smells amazing," he commented, keeping a respectful distance as Beth moved around the kitchen. "Grandma's roast chicken," Emma informed him proudly, "with rosemary from our garden. And I made the biscuits," Ethan added. "Well, Mama helped with the oven part." Richard smiled at his son. "I can't wait to try them." The dynamic between them had evolved into something none of them could have predicted 2 years ago. Not a reconciliation between Beth and Richard, that chapter was firmly closed, but a new kind of family arrangement built on mutual respect and the shared love of 2 remarkable children. Richard had his own apartment in Tulsa now, a modest 2-bedroom where the twins had their own space for weekend stays. He attended their school events, sports games, and recitals. He helped with homework, particularly math, which had never been Beth's strong suit. He had become, against all odds, a good father. As they settled around the dining table, Beth at one end, Richard at the other, the twins between them, Beth felt a sense of peace that had been hard-won. This wasn't the family she had imagined when she'd married Richard in her 20s, starry-eyed and believing in forever. It was something different, more complex, shaped by pain and growth, but ultimately stronger for having been broken and carefully reassembled. "Before we eat," Beth said, "let's each share something we're grateful for. Emma, would you like to start?" Emma thought for a moment. "I'm grateful for my science project winning first place. And for Mama's new strawberry pie that's going to be in stores next month." "I'm grateful for my baseball team," Ethan said. "And that Daddy's coming to my game on Saturday." Richard looked surprised and touched. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." When his turn came, Richard spoke carefully, his eyes moving between the 3 faces around the table. "I'm grateful for second chances, for the opportunity to know my amazing children, and for Beth's generosity in allowing me to be here, despite everything." Beth felt the weight of his words, the genuine remorse behind them. The anger that had once burned so fiercely had long since cooled, replaced by something like compassion for the man who had lost everything that truly mattered in pursuit of what didn't. "And you, Mama?" Emma prompted. "What are you grateful for?" Beth looked at her children, healthy, happy, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. She looked at her ex-husband, humbled, transformed, committed to being the father their children deserved. And she thought of the empire she had built from nothing but determination and her grandmother's recipes. "I'm grateful for the journey," she said simply. "Even the hardest parts, especially the hardest parts, because they led us here, to this table, to this moment." As they ate, the conversation flowed easily: school projects, Richard's students, the latest developments at Harrington Foods. The company continued to thrive under Beth's leadership, expanding into new markets, developing innovative products, maintaining its commitment to employing women returning to the workforce. The new factory in Memphis is almost ready, Beth mentioned as they cleared the dinner plates. I'll need to be there for the opening next month. That's your third factory, right? Richard asked, genuinely interested in her business success. Fourth, Beth corrected. We opened the one in North Carolina last year. Mom's picture was in Forbes magazine. Ethan informed his father proudly. They called her the billion-dollar queen of comfort food. Richard smiled. A well-deserved title. After dinner, while the twins went to finish their homework, Beth and Richard sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the Oklahoma sky in shades of pink and gold. These quiet moments had become part of their new routine, a time to discuss the children, to coordinate schedules, to maintain the respectful co-parenting relationship they had worked hard to establish. Beth, Richard said after a comfortable silence, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. She turned to him, curious. What is it? I've met someone, he said carefully. Her name is Diane. She teaches English at the community college. Beth felt a momentary surprise, followed by a realization that she wasn't jealous or upset, just concerned about how this might affect their children. That's good, Richard, she said sincerely. You deserve happiness. Thank you, he replied, clearly relieved by her reaction. It's still new, but it feels right, different from anything before. She's kind, intelligent, grounded. Have the twins met her? Beth asked, the mother in her immediately focusing on what mattered most. Not yet, Richard assured her. I wanted to talk to you first to make sure you're comfortable with it, and to get your advice on how to introduce her to them. The fact that he sought her input, that he prioritized the children's well-being and her comfort level spoke volumes about how much he had changed. I appreciate that, Beth said. Maybe start with something casual, a picnic at the park, ice cream. Keep it light, no pressure. Let them get to know her gradually. Richard nodded, taking her advice seriously. That sounds perfect. And Beth, I want you to know that no one will ever replace you in their lives. Or try to. I know that, she said confidently. Our children know who their mother is. That's never been in question. They sat in companionable silence for a few more minutes before Richard spoke again, his voice thoughtful. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? If I hadn't been such a fool 7 years ago? Beth considered the question, looking out at the garden she had planted with her own hands, the home she had created for her children, the life she had built from the ashes of their marriage. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I look at everything that came after, Harrington Foods, the foundation, the opportunities we've created for other women. None of that would exist if you hadn't left. You might have built something just as impressive, Richard suggested. You were always capable of greatness, Beth. I just didn't see it then. Maybe, she acknowledged, but it would have been different. And I like the life I've created, Richard. I'm proud of it. I wouldn't trade it, even to erase the pain. He nodded, understanding. You turned betrayal into triumph. Not everyone could have done that. My grandmother used to say that life gives you exactly what you need, even when it doesn't give you what you want, Beth said, smiling at the memory. I didn't understand what she meant until I had to rebuild my life from scratch. Inside the house, they could hear the twins laughing about something, the sound carrying through the open windows. The simple joy in that laughter was the greatest testament to the healing that had taken place, to the resilience of children when surrounded by love and stability. They're going to be fine, aren't they? Richard asked, his voice carrying a father's eternal concern. Better than fine, Beth assured him. They have 2 parents who love them, who put their needs first. That's more than many children have. As the evening wound down and Richard prepared to leave, the twins came out to say goodbye, each hugging him tightly, secure in the knowledge that they would see him again soon. This, perhaps, was the greatest gift Beth had given them, the ability to trust in their father's presence, to believe in his love despite his past absence. See you Saturday, Daddy, Ethan reminded him. Game starts at 10. I'll be there early, Richard promised. Front row. After the twins went back inside, Richard turned to Beth one last time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." She understood all that those two words encompassed. Thank you for raising our children with such love and wisdom. Thank you for allowing me back into their lives. Thank you for finding a way to forgive what I once thought was unforgivable. "You're welcome," she replied, equally simple, equally profound. As Richard drove away, Beth remained on the porch for a moment, breathing in the sweet evening air. The journey from abandoned wife to billion-dollar CEO had been long and often painful, but standing here now, with her children safe inside the home she had created, with her business thriving beyond her wildest dreams, with peace in her heart where bitterness had once resided, Beth knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had not just survived, she had transformed. And in that transformation, she had discovered a strength, a purpose, and a joy that no betrayal could ever diminish. This story reminds us that our greatest setbacks can become our most powerful comebacks. Share this with a sister who needs to hear that her story isn't over yet. And if you want more empowering tales like Beth's, hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video from Mr. Harrison. Remember, Queens, when life hands you bitter lemons, you have two choices. You can remain bitter, or you can add sugar, water, and make something refreshing. Choose to make something sweet, not just for yourself, but for all those whose lives you touch. Your greatest triumph may be waiting on the other side of your deepest pain. In the words of Beth's grandmother, life gives you exactly what you need, even when it doesn't give you what you want. Trust the journey, embrace your strength, and know that you are capable of transforming any betrayal into a billion-dollar blessing. Until next time, this is Mr. Harrison, reminding you that your story isn't defined by those who walk away. It's defined by how magnificently you rise after the fall.